Next section is the Dodd Bill, Both Fact and Fantasy, Part 1 of 2. June 1966. America's 40 million or so hunters, trap and target shooters, plinkers, and other law-abiding gun owners are about to be stepped on by U.S. Congress if Senator Dodd has his way, and the sportsmen are told it won't hurt. Senator Thomas Dodd, Democrat from Connecticut, says the latest of a series of firearms control bills, S. 1562, will affect only crime and criminals, that the duck hunter, deer, stalker, competition shooter will never be caused more than a minimal inconvenience by his administration-approved proposal. The average sportsman is more interested in reading of hunt in Africa than studying the dry, confusing fine print of a bill that would make the guns for that African hunt illegal. He is lulled by the assurance that his shooting sports will never be hampered by crime bills, but he may be jarred awake in the near future when he discovers that he may have to drive many miles to buy a box of .22 caliber ammunition. It can happen. Most Washington observers are convinced that the Dodd bill will pass this year or next year, since Congress doesn't like to approve controversial measures at election time. While Joe, average hunter, has been asleep, a determined group of his shooting friends have missed hunts, let dust gather on their gear, and waited in the many pages of doings of Congress trying to see that the bill doesn't pass. Joe A. Hunter, if he won't take time to read the administration's gun control bill, can take the word of noted outdoor authorities like Senator Dodd, Attorney General Nichols Deb something, and of the writers of the women's magazines that S. 1592 won't affect sportsmen. Or he can accept the opinion of such nationally known outdoorsmen and conservatives as Henry R. Woodward of the Colorado Game and Fish and Parks Commission, C.R. Guttersmith of the Wildlife Management Institute, Richard R. Stroud of the Sports Fishing Institute, Howard Carter Jr. of the National Shooting Sports Foundation, Dr. E.C. Hadley of the Sporting Arms and Ammunition Manufacturers Institute, Robert T. Dennis and Isaac Walton of the Isaac Walton League, and countless other sportsmen and industry groups. They are in unanimous agreement that the administration's gun bill will have a far-reaching and damaging effect on the hunting and shooting sports. Senator Dodd's claims members of the gun lobby oppose his efforts represent a selfish, wrong-headed minority willing to allow rampant crime to flourish. Note, nothing could be further from the truth. These men and these organizations are greatly concerned by criminal misuse of firearms, for criminal use threatens the ownership and use of sporting arms by the great majority of law-abiding, gun-abiding, responsible citizens. They oppose Senator Dodd's bill because it will hurt sportsmen and not reduce crime. If those groups, can be shown that any reasonable legislation will reduce crime or criminal use of guns, they will support it, even if it means restricting some lawful shooting sports. Senator Dodd has claimed repeatedly that crime statistics support reasoning and purpose of his bill, that availability of firearms contributes to crime, but figures are available from the Federal Bureau of Investigation that offer and other reliable sources showing the truth of the gun owner's basic argument that restricting guns won't keep criminals from acquiring guns. Sportsmen, as responsible citizens, must learn as much as possible about criminal use of firearms and what type of legislation would reduce or end it. If laws are not passed to reduce gun crimes, private ownership of firearms may be eliminated. It has happened in other countries. It could happen here. Evidence has shown that some criminals and juveniles are circumventing local laws by purchasing firearms by mail. Extremist groups are able to buy surplus mortars, anti-tank weapons, and other crew-served heavy ordnance and ammunition. While these may never be used in crime, and although the number of such groups may be small, their availability and sale worries the general public and is being used as a powerful lever by the anti-gun forces. Guns are used in more than half of all murders and in an increasing number of other crimes. These are the problems that caused the administration to seek additional control of firearms. The bill proposed to solve these problems would prohibit interstate mail-order sales of firearms to individuals, prohibit sales of pistols by dealers to persons under 21, and sales of rifles and shotguns to persons under 18. Prohibit dealers from selling pistols to persons not a resident of their state, and prohibit importation of military surplus arms and other guns unless a type or quality generally recognized particularly suitable for lawful sporting purposes, and that the importation would not be contrary to the public interest. The Secretary of the Treasury would determine what would be the public interest. The next section is it would bring under federal control mortars and destructive devices as written. This would include any gun above 50 caliber, including many highly prized and valuable elephant guns and Civil War era antique rifles and handguns. Increase license fees for dealers in firearms or ammunition, except shotgun ammunition, from $1 a year to $100 a year, while limiting interstate shipment to dealers. The bill would give the Secretary of the Treasury broad discretion in determining who may become a dealer on the basis of his business experience, financial standing, or trade connections. The sole purpose of this provision is to reduce the number of dealers. Countless thousands of small legitimate dealers would be eliminated, along with the many thousands of grocery stores and crossroads stores which handle ammunition as a convenience to customers. In Senator Dodd's words, provide other federal controls designed to make it feasible for states to control more effectively traffic in firearms with their borders under their police powers. It is these controls that the National Rifle Association objected to for giving the Secretary of the Treasury or his delegate unlimited power to surround all sales of guns by dealers with arbitrary and burdensome regulations and restrictions. Shipment of firearms out of the state for repair, hunting, or other legitimate purposes would be limited by whatever regulations, form, documents, or fees that the Secretary of the Treasury might determine. In 7 sections, this bill calls for regulations to be decided by the Secretary rather than Congress. Gun owners are extremely leery of such broad powers being delegated because of previous experience with rulings and regulations of the Alcohol and Tax Division of the Treasury Department, which enforces federal gun control laws. The regulations the Secretary may decide are necessary will be seen in the years after the bill is passed, and all the protesting of Senator Dodd that the law-abiding sportsman will not be caused more than minimal inconvenience will be as worthless as last year's duck stamp. Senator Dodd worked with the National Rifle Association, the National Shooting Sports Foundation, and other shooting groups in drawing the original Dodd Bill S. 1975, which provided for reasonable requirements for purchasing a handgun in interstate commerce. Although rifles and shotguns were included in the bill the week after the assassination of President Kennedy, the NRA continued to support the bill, but when many of its members opposed the measure, Senator Dodd seemed to feel he had been double-crossed by the NRA, and its programs had come under violent attack by Congress and in the press. Lengthy hearings were held in both houses of Congress, yet none of the firearms control bills have ever come out of committee. when the Senate Commerce Committee failed to approve S. 1975 and seemed unlikely its 1965 successor, S. 14, Senator Dodd succeeded in building the hearings of S. 1592 before the Senate subcommittee to investigate juvenile delinquency, of which he is a chairman. It is unusual for the Senate to allow the Speaker of a bill, particularly a controversial measure, to preside over the hearings, for the chairman has the power to badger, interrupt, and harass unfavorable witnesses while drawing out the testimony of favorable witnesses. But even with the deck stacked and the aces up his sleeve, Senator Dodd was not able to muster the support in 1965 to bring his bill to the Senate floor. He was quoted recently as saying that this year will be different. I'm going to get a vote as long as, at long last, if I have to use every parliamentary trick in the book and several that aren't. When Senator Dodd introduced S. 1592 on March 22, 1965, he cataloged a long campaign to place additional controls on firearms, citing his discovery that rifles and shotguns were indeed a major contributing factor to crime explosion being experienced by this nation. Yet, as we all know, he said, the blind, almost mindlessly efforts of a segment of the gun enthusiasts and their shabby, time-worn slogans have to date been successful in defeating my efforts. Some congressmen must have considered this a slap in the face, for it is difficult to believe that any such small minority could wield such an influence. It is interesting that such savvy, time-worn arguments could have such power unless the arguments remain true. Turning to statistics, Senator Dodd said in 1963 approximately 5,000 people were murdered with firearms. 1,400 were murdered with rifles and shotguns. About 2,500 of these murders were committed with mail-order weapons. That the statistic on these murder and mail-order weapons is doubtful, to say the least. The FBI has published no such figures. It was never repeated during the subsequent lengthy hearings. After telling the Senate several cases of misuse of mail-order firearms, he asked, but left unanswered, some of the shabby, time-worn questions that the shooting clan has asked for years. Will any controls, and specifically these federal controls, solve a problem of this nature? Will not those who want guns manage to get them, whatever the law says? Senator Dodd continued, questions such as these are often raised against any attempt to clean up these abuses. My answer is that we must start somewhere. There is no sense in starting somewhere unless we all know which way we want to go. If Senator Dodd's ultimate aim is to assure total and complete control of firearms among the law-abiding, he is obviously charting the right course. But if his aim is to control criminal use of firearms, he must first answer this shabby, time-worn questions. He continued with the statement that is the crux of the argument. The facts are on the side of those who believe we can solve this problem. FBI information demonstrates that in those areas where firearms regulations are lax, the homicide rates by firearms is substantially higher than in those areas where there are more stringent controls. In Dallas, Texas, Phoenix, Arizona, where firearms regulations are particularly non-existent, the percentage of homicides committed by guns in 1963 was 72% and 65% in cities where there were strong regulations. We have the following figures: Chicago 46%, Los Angeles 43%, Detroit 40%, and Philadelphia 36%. And in New York City, which its much maligned Sullivan Law, the murder rate was a mere 25%. Thus, regulation has made a strong impact on this situation, even though the uncontrolled interstate traffic makes it easy to evade the law. Notice that the senator is not referring to the murder rate, but the percentage of murders with firearms. Homicide rates are not necessarily lower in areas with tight firearm controls. Robbery rates in an area where the thug does not have to worry about the shop store owner having a gun are often far higher. The murder and robbery rates per 100,000 in the cities he selected to prove his case in Milwaukee, selected by the author, are shown as they are limited to the Nix 1964 FBI report. Dallas, with its staggering murder rate, would seem to prove Senator Dodd's thesis, but Milwaukee, almost identical in size to Dallas, also has few gun control laws. Its murder rate is a little more than half the national average. The Dallas robbery rate is less than that of any of the cities cited by Senator Dodd as examples of firearms control crime. With the exception of Los Angeles, all of Senator Dodd's good examples cities have higher than average murder rates. 3 of the 5 good example cities have robbery rates double or quadruple the natural average and far exceeded the rates of the bad example cities. Preliminary figures for 1965 released by the FBI in March show 22% reduction in the number of murders in Dallas and a 25% reduction in Phoenix. Checking the list of Senator Dodd's examples, the gun controls work shows New York murders down less than 1%. Philadelphia, where regulation of firearms went into effect in March of 1965, up a staggering 50%. The senator might claim that murder rates are increasing in states where gun control cities, in strict gun-controlled cities because of mail-order guns, although his figures show fewer gun deaths in these cities. But how does he explain the decreases in this horrible example cities of Dallas and Phoenix? During the course of his 1965 hearings, testimony was introduced concerning the weakness of gun laws in New Hampshire, Maine, and Vermont, Massachusetts. Police officials complained that criminals were buying guns there to circumvent the state's rigid laws. Massachusetts requires a permit to purchase a handgun. Its murder rate in 1964 was 2.0, admirably low, but in the gun control system, the cause of the low rate? According to Senator Dodd's reasoning, the crime rate is the adjoining states with the weak laws he condemns, with much higher than Massachusetts. On the contrary, Maine's murder rate was 1.5%. The robbery rate in these states was 7.6, 5.6, and 3.6, respectively, while the rate for Massachusetts was 30.6. Of the law-abiding 41,000 Bay State residents who have registered their 126,000 guns, less than half of 1% have ever been involved in any type of crime, and those that were mostly misdemeanors, according to Sergeant Higgins of the Massachusetts State Police, who testified in favor of S-1592. This proves the validity of the shabby, time-worn argument that only the law-abiding citizen heeds and obeys firearms laws.
The guys and gals of GunWebsites.com encourage you to take a CCW class every year, practice at least once a month, and carry every day. Thanks for watching GunWebsites.com.